The collapse of an empire rarely begins with a spectacular public explosion. More often it starts with a sound so quiet you might easily miss it. In this case, it was the sharp, unforgiving click of a declined biometric keycard, followed immediately by the polite confiscation of a state-issued corporate credit line in a matter of seconds, amidst the clinking champagne glasses of a highly exclusive private reception. The carefully curated illusion of Queen Camilla's absolute financial sovereignty was quietly, ruthlessly dismantled. What the Queen just realized, standing in the shadows of a VIP enclosure, is that a crown might grant you the power to dictate the social calendar, but true institutional hard power is forged entirely in strict fiduciary law, unyielding corporate governance, and the silent, impenetrable control of the kingdom's treasury. Over the next few minutes, we are going to unpack the highly audacious, financially aggressive power grab Camilla recently attempted under the guise of modernizing the monarchy's workforce. We will expose how a clandestine maneuver to siphon taxpayer funds to build a permanent, non-royal shadow court inadvertently triggered a freezing institutional retaliation engineered by Prince William and the Royal Finance Committee. By the end of this breakdown, you will understand the terrifying realization currently paralyzing the Queen. Despite sitting at the absolute pinnacle of the British social hierarchy, she holds absolutely no keys to the sovereign vault. To fully grasp the magnitude of this internal financial warfare, we must first step back and analyze the monumental 30-year psychological manipulation that brought Camilla to this modern peak. For 3 decades, she survived the bitter public ruin of the 1990s, not by standing alone, but by surrounding herself with a fierce, impenetrable inner circle of wealthy, aristocratic loyalists. These friends served as her shield against a hostile press and a skeptical public. When she was officially crowned queen, dropping the restrictive consort caveat entirely, she executed her first major structural change to the institution. She publicly abolished the centuries-old tradition of ladies-in-waiting, replacing them with a modernized concept titled the Queen's Companions. To the global media, this was praised as a refreshing, streamlined update to an archaic royal system, but behind closed doors, it was a masterful, calculated power play. The 6 women appointed as Queen's Companions were not seasoned royal servants, they were Camilla's most intimate private friends. By elevating them, she operated under the fundamental belief that her psychological control over King Charles granted her the absolute right to reshape the operational foundation of the crown. She felt entirely untouchable, assuming that the sprawling palace bureaucracy would treat her personal social circle with the exact same financial deference historically reserved for the sovereign bloodline. That dangerous illusion of absolute authority collided with a brutal economic reality just days ago, driven by an overwhelming sense of institutional desperation. As the realities of King Charles's fragile reign become impossible to ignore, a deep-seated paranoia has taken root within Camilla's private office, fearing that her ability to distribute elite royal privileges will instantly evaporate the moment the crown shifts to the next generation. Her senior advisors attempted an unprecedented administrative heist behind the scenes during a routine review of the royal household budget. Camilla's logistical team quietly drafted a sweeping financial mandate. What appears to be true, according to internal treasury leaks, is that her office directed the keeper of the privy purse to seamlessly integrate the 6 Queen's Companions into the permanent top-tier payroll of the sovereign grant. The sovereign grant is the heavily scrutinized taxpayer-funded pool of money that covers the official duties of the working royals. Camilla was attempting to place her non-royal friends on lifetime sovereign stipends. Furthermore, the mandate demanded that these women be issued diplomatic tier security clearances, unvetted access to the royal transport fleet, and unlimited state-funded corporate expense accounts. It was a calculated attempt to use the immense financial machinery of the state to bankroll a permanent private shadow court. Camilla wanted to artificially manufacture a rival royal infrastructure, using the public exchequer to elevate her loyalists to sovereign status before the political winds of the monarchy could shift. She assumed she could quietly slip this massive requisition into the routine corporate ledgers, firmly believing that the royal accountants would simply comply in silence out of deference to her title. She severely underestimated the cold forensic vigilance of Prince William's financial apparatus and his uncompromising protection of the sovereign brand. The Prince of Wales does not rely on drawing room gossip to protect the financial survival of his inheritance. As the Duke of Cornwall and a senior stakeholder in the Crown estate, his team relies on the meticulous monitoring of royal ledgers, corporate manifests, and internal estate expenditures. The discovery of this secret financial coup did not manifest through an explosive family confrontation. It happened through a routine digital audit of the sovereign grant requisition servers. When William's fiercely loyal financial oversight directors cross-referenced the newly submitted payroll authorizations emanating from Camilla's office, the anomaly was immediately flagged. When the staggering figures were brought directly to Prince William, the reality was immediate and chilling. He recognized this not as a harmless desire to reward loyal friends, but as a parasitic encroachment upon the state treasury and a staggering exploitation of public funds. While Catherine, the Princess of Wales, continues her uncomplaining sacrifice, strictly adhering to operational budgets and steadfastly protecting the institution's public dignity, Camilla was utilizing the bureaucratic system to distribute the ultimate symbols of sovereign wealth to outsiders. For William, this crossed an invisible, unforgivable legal line to allow the king's wife to treat the sovereign grant as a private ATM. For her social circle would be an act of gross institutional negligence, threatening the very survival of the monarchy in a modern economic climate. The response from the future king was executed with a freezing, ruthless legality that used the very weight of corporate protocol as a weapon. Prince William did not leak the attempted financial theft to the tabloids, nor did he engage in an undignified shouting match within the palace corridors. He utilized the system to execute a silent, devastating counterstrike. Operating with unprecedented administrative leverage as the heir apparent, William quietly coordinated a strict binding update with the Lord Chamberlain and the Royal Treasury. Internally, this maneuver is now quietly referred to as the Sovereign Expenditure Directive. Without a single word spoken in anger, William legally and entirely overhauled the corporate authorization process. He activated a rigid, unyielding protocol dictating that absolutely no new lifetime payroll appointment sovereign expense accounts or diplomatic tier clearances could be issued to non-working royals without the explicit physical co-signature of the Prince of Wales. He effectively stripped Camilla's office of all independent administrative oversight regarding state funds, turning the royal treasury into an impenetrable fortress governed by strict bloodline law. The execution of this silent retaliation was breathtaking in its subtlety, resulting in an absolute visual and psychological humiliation for the Queen. Camilla did not receive an angry financial confrontation before the event. Instead, the trap was set to spring at the exact moment she could do absolutely nothing about it. During a highly publicized, exclusive charity gala, where Camilla and her Queen's companions were attempting to project their newly minted sovereign authority, the Shadow Court moved to access the heavily guarded VIP holding suites. They expected to sweep past the guards utilizing their newly issued sovereign biometric cards, and expected their exorbitant logistical tabs to be seamlessly absorbed by their royal credit lines. Instead, as the entourage approached the secure perimeter, they hit an invisible, impenetrable wall of corporate protocol. When the companions swiped their state-issued cards, the digital scanners echoed with a sharp, denied access beep. The electronic lights flashed a freezing, undeniable red. The Royal Protection Officers and Event Protocol Directors operating under direct binding orders from Prince William's administrative office, rather than the King's household, politely but firmly halted the Queen's friends. In front of the bewildered high society guests and event organisers, the officers informed Camilla's entourage that their sovereign corporate accounts had been flagged, frozen and permanently revoked under the new Treasury guidelines. In a display of devastating aristocratic restraint, the security personnel physically confiscated the state-issued credit cards directly from the hands of the Queen's companions. They were informed that they held no official diplomatic clearance, and their access to the sovereign suites was denied. Furthermore, they were handed politely formalized notices from the Royal Finance Office, stating that all previous corporate expenditures would be billed directly to Camilla's private personal accounts, as they were not authorized state business. What looked like a routine security and ticketing glitch was actually a total dismantling of Camilla's financial empire. As the reality of the confiscated cards and the denied entry set in, Camilla, standing mere feet away, experienced a wave of cold, suffocating panic. She had to maintain her pristine aristocratic facade, smiling through the humiliation, while secretly knowing her entire carefully curated shadow court had just been literally financially severed by her stepson's corporate detail, stripped of her illusion of supreme economic control, walled off by the heir apparent, and publicly disciplined without a single word being spoken. she realized the trap had snapped shut. Her administrative trick had not only failed, but it had permanently exposed her terrifying vulnerability. She was forced to confront the commercial reality that she possesses absolutely no sovereign capital. Terrified by the sudden collapse of her authority over the royal vault, Camilla retreated from the public eye, preparing to deploy the final weapon she believed she still controlled. The heavy mahogany doors of the king's private library closed behind Camilla, sealing out the echoes of the public gala, but trapping a suffocating collective panic within the room. She held the internal treasury alert receipts, the forensic proof that her inner circle had been stripped of their state-funded lifelines in front of the very aristocracy she had spent decades trying to conquer. For over 30 years, Charles had been her ultimate shield, burning through his own political capital, defying his mother, his advisors, and public opinion to force Camilla's acceptance into the royal fold. She fully expected that in this moment of acute administrative humiliation, the king would activate his supreme sovereign authority, summon Prince William, and deliver a crushing reprimand to his heir. She expected Charles to remind his son that Camilla was the crowned queen, and that her organizational demands must be met to preserve the unified front of the monarchy. But she encountered something far more terrifying than sovereign rage. She encountered a devastating absolute silence. What appears to be true, according to those familiar with the internal dynamics of the king's household, is that Charles simply refused to intervene. He did not raise his voice. He did not defend his wife's aggressive attempt to integrate her private social circle into the state payroll. He looked at the frozen access logs, read the legally binding sovereign expenditure directive issued by his son's office, sat in the quiet of his study, and did absolutely nothing. This was the psychological climax of Camilla's decades-long campaign for structural power, and it ended with a freezing realization. Charles is no longer the rebel Prince of Wales fighting for his mistreated lover. He is the sovereign. And as the monarch facing his own profound vulnerabilities, health battles, and the fragile transitional state of his reign, his primary overriding duty is the preservation of the crown's financial and public integrity. Charles knows with forensic clarity that the sovereign grant is strictly monitored by the government, the National Audit Office, and a highly critical British public. To attempt to use his emotional weight to override a strict corporate audit, simply to appease his wife's vanity and provide taxpayer-funded luxury for her aristocratic friends, would be an act of institutional suicide. To dismantle William's invocation of financial protection would signal a divided, chaotic monarchy that allows the king's spouse to cannibalize the sacred state apparatus for private networking. In that singular moment of absolute silence, the king chose the long-term survival of the institution over the personal ambition of his wife's inner circle. Camilla learned the hardest lesson of her royal life: the king will no longer save her from the Prince of Wales. This silent betrayal exposed the terrifying architecture of Camilla's reality, forcing her to confront a landscape of pure commercial and institutional desperation. To the global public, she is a queen draped in historic velvet, riding in gilded carriages and waving from the balcony of Buckingham Palace. They assume that the title comes with an impenetrable fortress of wealth and independent economic power. But behind the closed doors of the palace, the forensic financial reality is that Camilla owns virtually nothing of the royal estate. She holds no independent constitutional funding, and her hand-picked shadow court possesses absolutely no legal standing. The vast real estate, the liquid wealth, and the billion-dollar corporate empire of the Duchy of Cornwall belong entirely and exclusively to Prince William. The grand residences are tied directly to the sovereign state. If the reign of King Charles were to unexpectedly end, Camilla would instantly transform into a dowager queen with zero biological connection to the new monarch, completely dependent on her stepson's administrative goodwill for her housing, her income, and her security. Her frantic attempt to rewrite the payroll rules of the sovereign grant was never just about a routine administrative update or helping her friends with their expenses. It was a frantic, calculated maneuver to secure a permanent, self-sustaining financial foothold and independent institutional legitimacy before her ultimate protector is gone. She knew that without King Charles, she would instantly become a temporary guest in an empire owned by a man who holds all the actual capital and commands the ultimate authority. Prince William is not just the heir to the throne, he is the billionaire landlord of the monarchy's private endeavors, controlling the vast agricultural lands, commercial properties, and financial portfolios that fund the family's operational costs. By instituting the co-signature requirement on all lifetime appointments and state expense accounts, William legally, quietly, and permanently locked her shadow court out of the state's core machinery, replacing her illusion of absolute power with the stark reality of total dependency. As Camilla's shadow constitutional empire was quietly dismantled behind the scenes, the physical and operational landscape within the palace began to immediately reflect the new order. This is where the silent execution of revenge translates into undeniable public reality. In the days following this internal crisis, viewers and royal analysts noticed a profound, subtle shift in how protocol is being weaponized across all sovereign spaces. The consequences of this financial blockade extend far beyond a single cancelled gala event or frozen credit card line. There has been a noticeable, rigid change in vendor access, staff assignments, and administrative clearance. The privilege of utilizing royal resources to elevate the presence of Camilla's non-royal circle has been permanently restricted. Any future policy proposals or organizational changes emanating from the Queen's private office must now be routed through a grueling multi-level vetting process managed entirely by William's constitutional teams, treated no differently than an external corporate application. Amidst this silent institutional reckoning, the presence of the Princess of Wales has become the ultimate, undeniable contrast. Catherine did not need to issue a statement condemning the financial overreach, and she did not need to lobby the royal treasury for protection. She simply allowed the massive quiet weight of her own track record to protect the institution. While Camilla scrambled in desperation to manufacture a permanent foothold and alter state expenditures for her friends, Catherine emerged as a portrait of freezing aristocratic restraint. Catherine does not need to use her royal status to enrich her inner circle or secure artificial power, because she understands the fundamental difference between public duty and private enterprise. She demonstrated that uncomplaining sacrifice, fierce protection of the bloodline, and steadfast loyalty to the crown will always outmaneuver the unchecked ambition of outsiders. The visual shifts are becoming visible to anyone who knows how to read the subtle language of the palace. Shortly after the Treasury guidelines were finalized, Kensington Palace released its own independently audited financial summary for its core charitable foundations. To the untrained eye, it was standard corporate reporting, but to those watching the internal power dynamics, the message was devastating. The documents bore exclusively the sovereign ciphers of William and Catherine, entirely detached from Buckingham Palace's centralized accounts operating with absolute financial autonomy and immaculate transparency. By showcasing this flawless corporate structure, William was actively executing the institutional restoration of the true bloodline while signaling the permanent boundary placed upon Camilla. The true royals remain on the inside, holding the keys to the state machinery, while the liabilities are managed from the outside with strict requirements and revoked credentials. Catherine does not need to fight Camilla for dominance because her husband has already engineered the ultimate checkmate. This brings us to the deeper, tragic meaning of this entire crisis. Camilla spent 30 years carefully clawing her way to the very top of the British social hierarchy. She endured intense public hatred, orchestrated a masterful public relations rehabilitation, and successfully convinced Charles to place the highest crown in the land upon her head. She believed that reaching the summit meant she would finally be safe, that she could secure her family's financial future, and permanently alter the history of the dynasty in her own image. But what this story, encoding the confiscated cards of the treasury, proves is that the crown on Camilla's head is entirely hollow. She is surrounded by the trappings of unimaginable power, yet she is paralyzed by the operational reality that she is merely a temporary tenant in William's empire. She played a 30-year game of chess, sacrificing everything for the ultimate title, only to realize too late that she cannot bring her family across the board. Camilla is now trapped in a gilded cage of her own making, sitting next to a king who will no longer defend her schemes, walled off from the state machinery, and forced to live under the absolute unyielding corporate authority of the next generation. The era of the Shadow Queen, attempting to restructure the financial foundations of the monarchy, is effectively over. If you want to continue unpacking the silent warfare, the hidden administrative maneuvers, and the psychological power dynamics of the modern British monarchy, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We will continue to pull back the curtain on the illusions of power, one subtle detail at a time. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next analysis.